What if one stranger's whisper saved your life, but destroyed your empire? What if the door you were dying to open was the door that would bury you forever? This is the story of a billionaire who almost stepped into his own grave, until a nobody stopped him. Stay until the end, because the twist in this story will leave you speechless. If you love stories about fate, karma, and the price of greed, hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss what's behind that door? Let me tell you about a man who had everything, and I mean everything. 3 corporations, 2 private jets, a penthouse so high above the city that the clouds would gather beneath his window like servants waiting to be dismissed. His name was Roland Voss, and if you lived in the city, you knew that name. You feared that name. But here is the thing nobody talks about when they speak of powerful men. Nobody asks what they lost to get there. Roland was not born rich. He was born in a small, cracked apartment on the east side of the city, the kind of building where the heating worked only when it felt like it, and the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbors' arguments like they were your own. His mother worked double shifts at a textile factory. His father left when Roland was 7 years old. No letter, no goodbye, just an empty coat hook by the door one morning. Roland used to stare at that empty hook for years. He swore, quietly, privately, in the way only wounded children swear things, that nobody would ever leave him powerless again. So he worked, he clawed, he studied until his eyes burned, and negotiated until his voice gave out. By 30, he had his first company. By 40, he had his first million. By 54, he had an empire. And he had nothing else, no wife. He had been engaged once, a woman named Diane, warm, patient, the kind of person who remembered how you took your coffee without being told. She left after 3 years of being treated like a footnote in his schedule. He didn't fight for her. He told himself he didn't have time. He had told himself that lie so many times it had become the truth. No children, no close friends. The men around him were associates, lawyers, yes men, people paid to agree with him. His assistant of 11 years, a quiet man named Ferris, once brought Roland a birthday cake on his 53rd birthday. Roland looked at it, looked at Ferris, and said, "I don't pay you for sentiment. Clear my 4 o'clock." Ferris never brought a cake again, and Roland never noticed. That is the saddest part of this whole story. Not the fall that was coming, not the karma waiting patiently like a creditor at the door. The saddest part is that Roland Voss had people around him who tried, people who offered something real. And every single time, he chose the deal over the human being, every single time. On the night our story begins, a stormy Thursday in November, Roland stood in his office on the 42nd floor, looking out at the city below. The rain hit the glass like it was angry at him personally. He was about to sign the biggest merger of his career. 4,000 people would lose their jobs by morning. He picked up his pen. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Some men don't realize they are already lost, long before the ground disappears beneath their feet. Roland straightened his tie. That was the thing about him. No matter what was happening inside, the outside was always perfect. Suit pressed, tie straight, face unreadable. He had spent 30 years building that wall around himself, brick by careful brick, until even he forgot there was something soft buried underneath it all. He picked up the merger documents from his desk. 11 months of work, 47 meetings, 3 lawyers who had aged visibly during the process, all of it coming down to one signature, one door, one moment. He walked down the corridor toward the private boardroom. The hallway was empty. It was past 9 in the evening. Most of his staff had gone home to their families, to warm dinners, to children asking about their day, to the small, ordinary moments that Roland had traded away so long ago he couldn't even remember what they felt like anymore. His footsteps echoed. He didn't mind the silence. He preferred it. He was 3 steps from the boardroom door when he saw her. She was standing directly in front of it. A girl, young, no older than 19, small in frame, with dark eyes that caught the hallway light in a way that felt almost impossible to explain. She was wearing a building maintenance uniform, the kind with the gray collar and the small logo patch on the shoulder. Her hair was damp. Her boots left faint wet marks on the polished floor. Roland stopped walking. Not because he was afraid, because in 30 years of running this building, nobody had ever simply stood in his way. He looked at her the way he looked at everything that inconvenienced him, with cold, quiet irritation. "Who are you?" he said. "This floor is restricted." She didn't move. She didn't apologize. She just looked at him. And there was something in her eyes that Roland could not name. Not fear, not defiance, something older than both, something that felt strangely like grief. "Wait," she said softly. "Don't open that door." The words were so quiet, so simple, but they landed on Roland like something heavy, like a hand pressing flat against his chest. He almost listened. For one single fragile second, something in him almost listened. But then the wall came back up. The suit, the tie, the 30 years of choosing power over instinct, logic over feeling, the deal over the human being standing right in front of him. "Get security up here," he said into his phone, eyes still fixed on her. "There's an unauthorized person on 42. He took one step toward her. And that is when his phone rang, a different call, his lead attorney, breathless, urgent. Roland held up one finger toward the girl, the same way you'd pause a conversation that didn't matter, and turned his back to take the call. It lasted 40 seconds. When he turned back around, she was gone. The hallway was empty. The wet boot marks on the floor were already dry, like she had never been there at all. Some warnings don't come with explanations. They come with a feeling. And the most dangerous thing a person can do is ignore a feeling they cannot explain. The attorney's problem took exactly 53 minutes to resolve. A missing clause, a numbering error on page 31. The kind of small, invisible mistake that could unravel an entire agreement if left uncorrected. Roland stood in his office while his legal team scrambled, barking instructions, drinking cold coffee, pretending the interruption didn't bother him. But something did bother him. Not the documents, not the delay. Her. The girl with the damp hair and the gray uniform, and the eyes that carried something he couldn't name. He kept seeing her face every time he looked away from his screen, kept hearing those 6 words in the back of his mind like a song you can't shake loose. "Wait. Don't open that door." He told himself it was nothing. A disturbed young woman who had wandered onto the wrong floor. A coincidence, a strange moment in an otherwise ordinary evening. He had built an empire by refusing to be rattled by things he couldn't quantify, and he was not about to start now. Security had found nothing, no record of entry, no sign of exit. The elevator logs showed nobody had used the lift to reach the 42nd floor in the last 2 hours except Roland himself. The stairwell cameras, nothing. The lobby sign-in sheet, blank. It was as if she had simply materialized from the air itself. Roland pushed it down, locked it away. That was what he did with things that unsettled him. He buried them under work and moved forward. At exactly 10:47, the corrected documents arrived. Roland gathered his team, 4 senior executives, 2 attorneys, his personal assistant Ferris, who carried a leather folder and said nothing, as always. They walked together down the corridor. Roland reached the boardroom door. He pushed it open, and immediately one of the attorneys grabbed his arm. "Wait," the man said sharply. "Do you smell that?" Everyone stopped. There it was, faint but unmistakable. A low, invisible presence in the air. The ghost of something chemical, something wrong. The kind of smell that your body recognizes before your mind does, triggering something ancient and biological that screams a single word. Danger. Roland stood completely still. Within minutes, the building's emergency maintenance team was on the floor. Within 12 minutes, they had located the source, a concealed gas line running beneath the boardroom's interior wall. A fracture, small, silent, undetected. It had been leaking for an estimated 4 to 6 hours, filling the sealed, windowless boardroom with invisible, colorless gas. The maintenance chief looked at Roland with an expression that said everything his words couldn't quite carry. "The light switch," he said quietly. "It's wired to an overhead electrical panel just inside the door. The moment someone flicked that switch on..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Roland stood in that corridor and finally understood what the girl had known. Everyone in that room would have died. Himself, his attorneys, Ferris, quiet, loyal Ferris, who had once brought a birthday cake and been dismissed without a second thought. All of them, gone. Roland looked down at the merger document still in his hand. 11 months of work, 47 meetings, a deal that would destroy 4,000 lives by morning. He had almost died for it, and standing there in that corridor, breathing air that suddenly felt like a gift, Roland Voss did something he had not done in decades. His hands trembled. over 30 years, even when something cracks them, even when trembling hands and a near-death experience and a vanishing girl all conspire to split them open, a man like Roland could still wake up the next day, straighten his tie, and choose the fortress over the feeling. He signed the merger at 9:15 in the morning. 4,000 termination notices went out by evening. Fathers sitting at dinner tables opened emails that told them their careers were over. Mothers who had worked the same position for 12, 15, 20 years stared at screens that reduced them to a line item in a restructuring plan. Young employees, some just 2 years into their first real job, read words like position eliminated and effective immediately and felt the specific hollow shame of being discarded by someone who never once learned their name. Roland ate dinner alone that night in his penthouse, steak, good wine, city lights below him like scattered diamonds. He slept without dreaming. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The merger processed smoothly. The numbers looked clean. Roland moved through his days with the quiet satisfaction of a man who believes he has won. And then, the first crack appeared. A journalist, young, persistent, the kind who still believed that truth was worth the inconvenience of telling it. She had received anonymous documents, internal communications from the absorbed company, emails, memos, encrypted files that had been carefully hidden inside the merger's legal architecture like a bomb inside a birthday gift. The story broke on a Tuesday. Roland was in a board meeting when Ferris placed a tablet silently on the table in front of him. The headline was 4 words long: Voss merger hides billions. Roland read it once, then again, then the room around him began to move in a way that expensive rooms are not supposed to move. The company he had absorbed, his supposed victory, had been quietly developing an energy technology for 11 years. A patent so valuable that independent analysts, once it became public, estimated its worth at 3 times Roland's entire fortune. The previous owners had buried it deliberately inside the merger's fine print, a legal trap so elegantly constructed that Roland's own attorneys had missed it entirely. Roland now owned the debt. Roland now owned the lawsuits. Roland now owned the public scandal. But the patent, the single most valuable thing in the entire agreement, had been legally ring-fenced into a separate holding structure, untouchable, unreachable, gone. He had been outsmarted completely. But that was only the beginning, because those 4,000 workers he had discarded like outdated furniture. Many of them were senior engineers, licensing holders, technical leads whose personal agreements were quietly threaded through Roland's other ventures like roots beneath a building. When they were cut, the roots came with them. 3 subsidiary companies lost their operating licenses within days. 2 active contracts became immediately void. Investors who had smiled at Roland across mahogany tables for 20 years began making different phone calls. His stock dropped 18% in a single afternoon, then 24%. Then the board called Ferris, delivered the message in person, standing in Roland's doorway, with an expression that was not quite sadness and not quite satisfaction, but something painfully human in between. "They've called an emergency vote, sir," Ferris said quietly. Roland sat behind his desk, the same desk where he had dismissed a birthday cake, where he had chosen deals over people, where he had built 30 years of a life that turned out to be a building with no foundation. He didn't respond. He just looked at that empty space across the desk where another human being might have sat, a wife, a friend, a child, someone who would have stayed, not because they were paid to, but because they wanted to. There was no one. There had never been anyone, and for the first time, Roland Voss understood that the most catastrophic thing he had ever lost was not his empire. It was every moment he had chosen it over everything else. Karma does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself at the door. It simply waits, patient and quiet, until the life you built on other people's pain begins to remember exactly what it was made of. There are moments in a person's life that do not feel like moments. They feel like verdicts. Roland sat alone in his office on the 42nd floor for the last time. The board vote had passed. His removal as CEO was effective in 72 hours. The legal team was already preparing asset disclosures. Outside his window, the city moved the way it always had. Indifferent, continuous, unbothered by the collapse of one man's carefully constructed world. He should have been making calls. Instead, he was looking at a photograph, a small printed image his investigator had placed on his desk that morning. A grainy black and white photograph pulled from a 1987 building archive, a young girl in a maintenance uniform, gray collar, small logo patch on the shoulder, dark eyes that carried something older than her face. He already knew before he read the name printed beneath it. Lael Oren, building maintenance staff, employed June 1985, 19 years old in that photograph. She looked exactly as she had standing in his corridor 3 weeks ago. Roland opened the full investigator's file with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. He read slowly, not the way he read contracts, scanning for leverage and loopholes, but the way a person reads something they know will change them permanently. Lael Oren had noticed the gas leak on the 42nd floor 4 days before the 1987 explosion. She had filed a written maintenance report. She had verbally told her supervisor twice. She had even slipped a handwritten note under the building manager's door, a young girl doing everything within her small power to make the people above her listen. Nobody did. On a Thursday evening in November 1987, the same month, the same day of the week as the night she appeared to Roland, Lael Oren went back to the 42nd floor herself. Not because it was her job anymore, she had actually been reassigned to a lower floor that week. She went back because she could not bear the thought of people walking through that door and not knowing what was waiting for them. The explosion happened at 9:41 in the evening. She was the only one on the floor. She was the only one who died. The company buried the maintenance reports, paid the right people, sealed the records under insurance litigation that lasted just long enough for everyone to forget. That company, restructured, rebranded, passed through 3 sets of hands over 40 years, had eventually become the founding acquisition of Roland's very first corporation, his empire, built on the foundation of a silenced girl. Roland closed the file. He sat for a very long time in a silence that felt nothing like the silence he usually preferred. This was not the silence of a man in control. This was the silence of a man finally, completely undone. He thought about his mother, working double shifts in a factory where nobody listened to the workers either. He thought about Diane and her warm patience he had wasted. He thought about Ferris and a birthday cake. He thought about 4,000 people reading termination emails at dinner tables. He thought about a 19-year-old girl who died trying to save strangers on a floor she had no reason to return to, who came back, 37 years later, to try one more time. Roland Voss put his face in his hands, and he wept, not the contained, managed emotion of boardrooms and negotiations, but something broken and bottomless and long overdue, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep inside a person that it carries everything with it, every buried feeling, every dismissed human being, every empty evening in a penthouse above a city that never knew who he really was, every year of choosing wrong. When it passed, something had shifted, something structural, like a wall that had finally mercifully come all the way down. He reached across the desk and pulled out a single document, the merger termination clause his own attorneys had drafted as a formality, never expecting it to be used. He signed it without hesitation. Then he picked up his phone and called a press conference for the following morning. He didn't call his lawyers first. He didn't call his PR team. He called Ferris, who answered on the second ring, because Ferris, despite everything, always answered. "Now I need you," Roland said simply. 3 words he had never said to another human being in 30 years. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Ferris said quietly, "And I know, sir, I'll be right there," and he came. Roland Voss lost his empire on a Friday. By the following Monday, the truth about Lael Oren was on the front page of every newspaper in the city, not because Roland's publicist crafted it carefully, not because a legal team approved the language, but because Roland stood at a podium with no notes, no prepared statement, and simply told the truth, all of it. The 1987 reports, the buried records, the silenced girl who had tried to save lives and was rewarded with erasure, the foundation his fortune had been built upon. He named the people responsible. He named the systems that protected them. He stood in the full exposure of it. No tie this time, collar open, hands gripping the podium like a man holding himself upright through sheer will. The room was completely silent when he finished. Then a woman in the third row, a journalist, older, who had covered this city for 40 years, began to cry. And somehow that was the moment everything changed. Weeks that followed were not easy. Redemption never is. Roland retained one small consulting firm from the wreckage of his empire, enough to remain operational, enough to be useful. He used every remaining resource to fund a full independent investigation into the 1987 cover-up. 3 former executives were referred for criminal prosecution. The sealed records were unsealed. Lael Oren's original maintenance reports, her handwritten notes, her careful documentation, her quiet, desperate attempt to be heard, were preserved and presented to the city as evidence of what happens when power refuses to listen. A memorial was built on the ground floor of the building, simple, modest, a small bronze plaque beside a single indoor tree that the building staff chose themselves. Lael Oren, 1968, 1987. She tried to warn us. We should have listened. Roland visited it every single morning, not for show, not for cameras. He visited before the building opened, alone, in the early gray light, standing quietly beside the plaque, the way you stand beside someone you owe an apology to, knowing the apology will never be enough but offering it anyway. Because that is what genuine remorse looks like. It is not loud, it is not performed, it is quiet, and it is daily, and it costs you something each time. The 4,000 workers, most of them were eventually reinstated through the restructured companies that emerged from the legal proceedings. The energy patent was licensed fairly, generating revenue that created new positions, new opportunities, new beginnings for families that had spent months in uncertainty and fear. Ferris, quiet, loyal Ferris, became Roland's only true business partner in the small consulting firm. They worked side by side in a modest office, nothing like the 42nd floor. No panoramic views, no polished corridors, but every evening before they left, Ferris made 2 cups of coffee and Roland drank his, and they talked. Not about deals, not about numbers, about ordinary things, about life, about how Ferris's daughter had just learned to ride a bicycle, about how Roland had started calling his elderly neighbor on Sunday mornings because she had nobody else. Small things, real things, the things Roland had spent 30 years calling a waste of time, and now understood were the only things that had ever actually mattered. In Lael Oren, nobody ever saw her again after that night in the corridor. No camera caught her leaving. No record explained her presence. The maintenance uniform she wore, retired from service in 1991, was never found. Some things do not have explanations. Some things are not meant to. What Roland believed, quietly, privately, in the way only changed men believe things, was that Lael had not come back for him specifically. She had not returned to save a billionaire. She had returned because she was who she had always been, a young woman who could not bear the thought of people walking through a dangerous door without someone standing in the way. In life, and apparently beyond it, Lael Oren simply could not stop trying to protect people, even the ones who didn't deserve it yet, especially those ones. So let me ask you something before we part. What doors are you forcing open in your own life right now? Doors that something deep inside you has been quietly whispering to leave closed. What warnings have you been walking past because they came from someone you decided didn't matter enough to hear? And who in your life, your Ferris, your Diane, your person who shows up and always answers on the second ring, have you been treating like a footnote in your own story? Because Roland Voss had to lose everything to learn what most of us already have. We just forget to see it. Lael Oren tried to warn them once in 1987. They didn't listen. 37 years later, she tried again. This time someone finally did, and sometimes that is enough. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you even a little, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Not because of the views, but because some stories deserve to travel further than the person who first tells them. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, stories that the world forgot to tell, about the people history chose to leave in the margins, and leave me a comment below, just one word. The word that this story left inside you when it ended. I will read every single one, I promise you that.